Last Sam's Cage by David A. Poulsen, Chapter 13, page 136. The B&E was easy, almost as easy as getting into Jack's place. The ladder was still leaning against the deck, and the window had been no problem, but Eddie didn't like being there. In fact, halfway through he wished he was somewhere else, doing something else. It was the first time since he had started stealing that he'd felt that way. He kept telling himself that without this stuff, he'd eventually starve. He'd waited until he was down to $1.11, and so this wasn't an exaggeration. He'd had to do something, but he was hating every minute of it. For one thing, these people seemed really happy. There were pictures all over the walls of them doing things together. In every one they were smiling, real smiles, the kind Eddie remembered from when he was little and his dad was still alive. Eddie recognized the woman and the little girl. He'd seen the woman twice before, the first time he'd checked this place out again in this morning as he'd watched the house from, down the street. The woman and the little girl had driven off in the Jeep Cherokee. A few minutes later, a man rode away from the house on a bicycle, briefcase in hand. Health type, Eddie smiled to himself. Granola and sunscreen. Eddie couldn't tell for sure if the man on the bike was the one in the pictures. His face had been hidden by his helmet as he rode away. But Eddie was willing to bet the whole $1.11 that it was. This didn't look like a family that had a stepfather on the scene. No Steve here. Eddie forced himself to turn away from the pictures. He decided to check out the master bedroom first. Experience told him that was where the best stuff would be. Stuff he could carry and stuff that would have some value on the street. The three guiding words to the B&E artist were cash, jewelry, and electronics. All three were easy to handle, were easy to dispose of, and usually had some value. Eddie's decision was a good one. Almost the first thing he spotted was a man's wristwatch, an expensive one. He checked it for engraving. You might get a decent dollar for something with initials, but not nearly as much as if the item was clean. This watch had no engraving. Eddie stuffed it in his pocket. He'd remembered to wear clothes with lots of pockets. A few more pieces of jewelry followed, then curling iron, a clock radio small enough to fit inside his biggest pocket, a handful of CDs, a cell phone, a nice dollar there, another watch, this one with a cheap plastic strap, he'd keep it for himself, an electric razor, a few coins, a couple of bucks at the most, and a paperback book. It was a mystery by someone named Tony Hillerman. Bonus. The book was also for himself. He was getting a little light on reading material. He left the bedroom and checked out the kitchen. He designated one pocket of his pants for food. He stuffed part of a loaf of bread, a bran muffin, 2 butter tarts, and a coil of sausage in the pocket. Then tied a 6-pack of orange juice cartons to his belt. It was as he turned away from the fridge that Eddie got lucky. An envelope lay on the kitchen table. An envelope addressed to the gas company. It was worth a quick peek. Bingo. He clipped to the bill inside the envelope were 4 $20 bills. Someone had probably intended to take the bill and pay it today, but had forgotten it on the counter. Eddie laid a loud kiss on the money as he detached it from the bill. He bent down and loosened his running shoe. The money went in there, under his foot. Even if he was chased and had to ditch the rest of the stuff, he'd still have the money. He looked at the gas company statement. The name was Pargeter. Mr. and Mrs. Neil Pargeter. That's who lived here. He couldn't decide if it was better to know the name of the people you were ripping off or not. Eddie took a green garbage bag out of one pocket and looked around. Small appliances were good. They were easy to carry and easy to fence. He started with the coffee maker and followed it with a toaster, an electric frying pan, and an electric tea kettle. He debated taking a set of ceramic mugs and sat on the kitchen counter. Finally, he wrapped them in a towel and carefully lowered them into the bag. He allowed himself a little smile. He'd get money for the mugs and he could use the towel himself. He hefted the garbage bag up and down, testing it for weight and to see that it wouldn't break before he got back to the zoo. It could take a few more items if they were small. He set a Brita water filter into the bag and added an electric knife. That would do for the kitchen. He was getting antsy to be out of there. It wasn't much of a haul, he realized, but it would keep him going for a while. And besides, he wasn't having any fun. A couple more good pieces and I'm out of here, he told himself. He wondered where these people kept their camera. Cameras generally brought decent coin, and a family like this was likely to have a pretty good one, maybe digital. He glanced in the living room, but decided to give it a miss. It was unlikely there would be anything portable enough for someone on foot to handle. Besides, the living room window faced the street and the drapes were open. No sense taking unnecessary chances. There were two more rooms. One was the little girl's bedroom, that was obvious, and the other was some kind of office. He was careful not to even step into the little girl's room. He figured she'd be scared enough just knowing that someone had been in their house. He didn't want to make it worse for her. He tried to laugh at himself for feeling that way. "You're getting soft in your old age," he told himself, but the laugh was forced. As he was turning away from the bedroom, he spotted a Walkman on the girl's dresser. He stood looking at it for a long time. It would be so great to have a little music, especially at night in the condo. He was at the dresser in 3 strides. He tucked the Walkman carefully in the bag and left the room without looking back. He stepped into the office. Desk, computer, printer, fax machine, some other stuff that Eddie didn't recognize and was too big to carry. Some bookshelves filled with books Eddie had no desire to read, and a camera. It was a beauty. A Canon with some kind of fancy-looking lens attached and another one lying beside it. Not digital, but decent. Better than decent. Perfect. He picked it up and gave it a quick look. There was a partially used film in it. He studied the camera for a minute, then rolled the rest of the film through. He popped it out and left it lying there where the camera had been. He hoped the people would appreciate the gesture. Better to have a few wasted pictures than no film and maybe some treasured photograph gone forever. "Damn, I'm a nice guy," Eddie told himself as he lowered the camera and the extra lens into the garbage bag. It was time to go. He decided to go out the back door. There was more chance of being seen, but the chances of getting away were a whole lot better than if somebody spotted you with your ass halfway down a ladder 8 feet off the ground. He stopped at the doorway of the little girl's bedroom once more and looked, carefully averting his eyes from the dresser top with its telltale space where the Walkman had been. As Eddie looked at the posters on her wall, she was obviously into rock stars and Disney movies. He thought back to the time when he was her age and safe and happy. "Hang on to it, kid," he said out loud. "Hang on to it every day and hope nobody takes it away from you." Eddie turned away from the girl's bedroom. His heart stopped. Later he couldn't say exactly how long it had stopped for, but he was absolutely certain that at that moment his heart stopped beating and he yelled, or maybe yelped was more accurate. Standing between Eddie and the back door, a door that now stood half open, was a person. He was a small person, but at least a 3 count. He was the scariest human being Eddie had ever laid eyes on, right up there with Stinkpegler or Ratsy. It was a few seconds before Eddie had recovered enough to properly assess the situation. The kid was maybe 5 years old, tops. Maybe not even that. That was the good news. He wasn't likely to try to overpower Eddie. The bad news was that the kid was there at all. If he started yelling, he'd bring people from all over the place, except he didn't look as if he was getting ready to yell. Mostly, he looked curious. Ooh, Eddie tried to grin at the kid. Scared me there. I didn't hear you come in. The boy kept looking at Eddie, but didn't say anything. You live around here, don't you? Eddie didn't want it to sound like too much of a question. Better to let the kid think he was familiar with the neighborhood, like he belonged here. The boy still didn't speak or move, just kept watching Eddie. Finally, his eyes moved from Eddie's face down to the green garbage bag. Eddie thought fast, unless the kid was either stupid or had never seen any television. He was going to figure out pretty quick that the total stranger about to slip out the back door with a garbage bag in his hand probably wasn't an invited guest. Eddie had to do something. You friends with the Pargeters? He asked, hoping the kid actually knew these people's last name. The boy nodded, still looking at the bag. Finally, his eyes drifted back up to Eddie's face. You doing something for Corey's birthday party? Eddie could have kissed him. Yeah, I brought some stuff to hide. It's sort of a surprise, and Corey's mom and dad, they wanted me to take some stuff to them to get ready for the party. He gestured at the bag, their camera and stuff, you know. The boy smiled, a conspiratorial smile, and nodded. Want me to help you? Oh, no thanks, but I'm pretty well finished. I should get this stuff to Mr. Pargetter's office. Should be neat party, hey? I got her a Barney backpack. You want to come to my house for a juice box? Hey, thanks. What's your name? James. Well, James, thanks, James, but I better not. How'd you get in here anyway? I thought I'd locked that door behind me. It was locked. I got my mom's key. Corey's mom left a key for my mom, 'cause there's some present getting delivered today. They didn't tell me what it was. Do you know? Eddie shook his head. But I'll bet it's a really neat one. Does your mom know you're over here? It was James' turn to shake his head. He looked at the floor. I snuck the key off the table. I wanted to see if the present was here. Yeah, well, James, you shouldn't be sneaking into people's houses, you know. Eddie had trouble getting that out without laughing a lot of trouble. Tell you what, though, want to play a game of hide-and-go-seek? Sure, the boy's freckled face lit up. Who gets to hide first? You can, Eddie told him. But it has to be somewhere in the house. That's the rule, okay? I'll count to 20. Eddie pretended to cover his eyes and watched through his fingers as James disappeared into the living room. Damn, Eddie thought, I should have made another rule. No living room. 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. He finished the count and started toward the living room, his eyes on the front window. Nobody going by on the street. He'd have to hope no one in any of the houses across the street had chosen this moment to look out the window. I wonder where he went, Eddie murmured as he spotted a running shoe sticking out from behind the Chesterfield. He pretended to look behind the TV, under a coffee table, and all around the piano, even lifting the seat of the piano bench and peering inside. Nope, not in here. I wonder where James went. Then, when a decent amount of time had gone by, he pretended to stumble across James' shoe, and the rest of James quieted by accident. The boy giggled as Eddie pulled him out from behind the couch and tickled his stomach. "Okay, it's my turn now. Do you know how to count to 20? Eddie asked. "Sure," James nodded confidently. "I can count up to 50, 100,000,000. "Yeah, well, that's real good, but 20 is probably enough. You have to count real slow and no peeking, okay?" James nodded. "1... Not yet," Eddie told the boy. "First get down there where you were hiding before and cover your eyes. I'll hide somewhere in the house. Remember? Count real slow." James dutifully crouched down behind the couch. Eddie could hear the count as he silently stepped into the kitchen and toward the back door. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, salmon, 10, 4, salmon. There was no telling how long James would count before he got bored. Eddie hoped the kid's mother wasn't standing in the next yard looking for him, but he had no choice. He had to go, and he had to go now. He slipped through the back door and gently closed it behind him. A quick look around told him all was okay for the moment. He stepped down the back steps and held his breath until he got to the garage. Between the garage and a couple of good-sized trees in the backyard, he was pretty well shielded from the houses on either side. Once he was in the alley behind the house, he started moving faster. He figured it wouldn't be long before James got frustrated in not being able to find him and went home to tell his mother about the big boy he'd seen in Corey's house. What would be really funny was if the kid's mother didn't believe him. Or maybe James wouldn't tell because he'd also have to say how he knew about the big boy. It didn't matter. Eddie realized, especially with the ladder leaning up against the house, he'd have to keep moving. He cut through another yard, crossed a street, and changed directions again. He had already decided to take the long way back to the zoo. He preferred to stay around buildings for as long as he could. It would have been easier if the general hospital was still there, where it had been for so many years. The rubble pile and open space wouldn't offer much cover. Still, he didn't have much further to go. He was minutes away from succeeding in his first solo B&E. He felt exhilarated and allowed himself a little laugh. But his mind's eye kept seeing the little girl's room with its pictures of rock stars and Disney movies on the walls, and Eddie stopped laughing. He picked up the pace, using a sort of jog-trot a lot of time. He wasn't sure how long it would be before the robbery was reported or when the cops would respond to the call, but he wanted to be back at the zoo before it happened. The worst part was the open space, probably the equivalent of several blocks. He would have to cross between the last buildings of Bridgeland and the shelter of the park area that bordered the zoo. He slowed down a little for that. Even though he didn't want to hide, he figured that even in the middle of the day, a kid running and carrying a garbage bag could look a little suspicious. He heaved the garbage bag up over his shoulder, trying for casual. He reached the zoo and didn't slow down until he was through the hole in the fence and inside. Here he felt safe, not just from the cops, but from the whole world. He'd made it, and that was cause for celebration. After counting his money one more time, he decided he could afford a pop, even though he had the 6 juice boxes. He wanted a pop bad. He was thirsty and his mouth was dry, although he knew it wasn't from the heat. He'd been scared, or at least nervous, in fact. He'd been feeling that way since last night. It was the first night since Jack had directed him to the condo that he'd had trouble sleeping. Tonight would be different, he told himself. Tonight he He would sleep like a baby. First he'd stash the stuff he'd stolen in the same place he kept his extra clothes. Then he'd get that pop and sit down and write for a while. He hadn't found a flashlight at the house, one of the things he'd wanted most, but he could use some of the money to buy one, along with enough batteries to read the Tony Hillerman book and a bunch more. He thought again about James counting and trying to find himself, and he laughed. This time he laughed so hard that tears rolled down his cheeks and along the corners of his mouth. It had been a good day. Yeah, it had been a real good day.